Sponsored by Stand Up to All Hate. Call a timeout against hate. Well, it did in fact happen. 2 days ago, there was a little-known columnist who said it was going to happen, and now of course, it has happened. Bill Belichick is the new head coach at the University of North Carolina. That's right, the winningest NFL coach in history in regards to number of Super Bowl wins. Bill Belichick, new head coach at North Carolina. Here's what I have said, and in sports radio, sports television, we're always told never assume. So I don't assume that you heard me the past couple of days, but let me reiterate. And what do I know? My team lost again last night at the Resch as we were dominated on the boards by UW-Milwaukee. But the build and the grind continues to try and build a college basketball program. But I do know way more about how it works than any of you do. And I think that some of the things that people will say about Bill Belichick as negatives are actually not truly part of the job. Like, you're not really doing a lot of home visits that truly matter. Now, might you do one for a 4-star, 5-star high school quarterback? Maybe. Remember, you're taking a job now, and a lot of these guys are committed. And, spring practice begins very, very quickly, but you're taking a job because you've got to get into the portal and get to work. Here's Belichick on his desire to coach college football.
I always wanted to coach in football, coaching college football. It just never really worked out. I had some good years in the NFL, so that was okay. This is really kind of a dream come true. I grew up in college football with my dad, and so it's great to come back home to Carolina, back in an environment that I really grew up in. This is really kind of a dream come true. I grew up in college football with my dad. It's great to come back home to Carolina.
Yeah, so here's Belichick talking about one of his first priorities on the job.
When you're little, you don't remember everything. Obviously, I was too young to remember a lot of things from Carolina. But as I grew up, you hear the same story over and over and over and over again. And so one story I always heard was Billy's first words were, beat Duke.
He was asked why he keeps coaching at 72 years old.
Your legacy is set. Why keep coaching?
Well, beat's working.
Good.
When you love what you do, and my dad told me this, when you love what you do, it's not work. It's really, I love what I do. I love coaching.
I too love coaching. Last night was work, but I like helping, mentoring, and learning a ton myself. He was asked about the possibility of leaving the job to go back to the NFL.
Bill, what do you say to people that fear that if you do succeed here, that you might leave for the NFL again in a year or two?
Yeah, I didn't come here to leave.
Yeah, I think at 72 years old, he took this job to coach in college, but also to coach to help his son take over the program. Like, look, coaches do this all the time. I told you this before. We look at it as nepotism, and it is. His son, though, was his defensive coordinator with the Patriots. His son has been a defense coordinator with the University of Washington this season, so he has some college experience. And, whether you want to do Dick and Tony Bennett, of course, Dick Bennett was a legendary coach at Green Bay, then took over the job at Wisconsin, and then he retired and only came out of retirement, sound familiar, to go coach at Washington State. And he only took the Washington State job to get Tony the job. He had to take the job for a couple of years, and then Tony got him to the Sweet 16. Of course, Tony Bennett recently retired after winning a national championship at Virginia. So it does work. But Judd Heathcote did this as a legendary coach at Michigan State, handing it off to Tom Izzo. That seems to have worked out well. But the big name is Belichick. People worry about home visits and personality. You can see when he wants to have charm, he does. And the big name, big ego head coaching gig in college is actually more prevalent than the NFL. So you can't guarantee anything will work. Obviously, he knows what he's doing in terms of coaching. You got to get a big-time quarterback. You got to find a way to figure out NIL and where do you place the money and who you go after and get. My only question would be knowing I know Michael Lombardi, who's a great player evaluator, has taken the job as a GM. But one, you got to have the connections with the NIL agents, and then two, what's I think really important is you have to evaluate for college football, which is a different evaluation, a different standard than you're holding pro football players to. Now, obviously, if they look like they could be a first or second round pick, you're going to want them at North Carolina. But in terms of the likelihood of getting players, the pecking order of things, and look, when you get to both teams offering the same money, what can separate one, Carolina, obviously, in terms of the school's pretty awesome. The ACC is winnable. But I do think that's when Belichick and his experience in the NFL, because all they really want is how much money can I get, how much will I pay, and can I make it to the NFL? And I've said this all weekend, and I know it's true. The Patriots under Bill Belichick's leadership, as well as his GMs throughout time, have been the best team on the waiver wire. And the waiver wire is sort of like a bastardized portal, only for NFL players. So put me down in the pleasantly and delightfully intrigued, but also cautiously optimistic. But I would use the word cautious. Cautious. And who would have known that all it took was 1 year away from the NFL, and now he's glib and entertaining at a press conference, which is my point all along. You go back to his NFL days, and he wouldn't have remained as a head coach that long in the NFL if he didn't have a great ability to relate to people. He just didn't want to do it at press conferences in the NFL. He probably thought, what's the win here? Whereas, press conferences can be a win in college athletics. Danny, what do you think? I mean, you're a huge college football fan. Just intrigued by your thoughts of Belichick.
Yeah, I think that this is... I find it interesting on what we constitute as does this work. Now with a 12-team playoff, does getting to the 12-team playoff, does winning an ACC championship, what are the qualifications of does this work? Do we think that now North Carolina can rise to the levels of the top programs in college football? I'm curious on that aspect. For me, him making the 12-team playoff is probably the for sure goal that you have to have. Just go there to, make the team better and, be an 18th ranked team. Like your goal is now to win the ACC and to be in the college football playoff. So I'm curious to see on how high of heights he can reach. I'm also just curious in the gamesmanship of, say, him and Dabo, going head to head in a conference showdown. I'm curious to see if other coaches will be exposed or if we'll know more about them and their staffs because of what Belichick is doing at North Carolina.
I think that's a great point. I also think it'll be interesting. He talked about a pro-style offense, which is a challenge, right? I mean, like, a lot of them have gone away. I know that on some level, Harbaugh used a pro-style offense, much more of a pro-running offense than a passing offense. We haven't seen the Shanahan running game in college. That would be interesting if somebody could implement that. But even Nick Saban at the end, right, went to a lot of spread game as well. So his use of, and there's always been talk that Belichick really, post Brady wanted to go to a running quarterback, quarterback who could really run and move, and never found the right guy. But I guess all of that we'll see, right? Remember there was rumors maybe they'll draft Lamar Jackson, and every year it was the possibility of drafting somebody, and obviously you end up getting a guy from Alabama. He talked about his relationship with Nick Saban, who wasn't good enough.
And maybe the real factor will be on what happens in the transfer portal. Not even NIL related, but just the fact of how many guys are going to want to go play for Belichick. Because in New England, when Brady left, there was also the thought of, well, they don't have players there and guys don't want to go there anymore because Brady's gone. Obviously, NIL will have a role in some of that. But if you are a recruit, or I'm curious if there are a bunch of recruits or guys that are looking to move on, how many will choose North Carolina over other programs?
Yeah, it'll be super fascinating to see. Sponsored by Stand Up to All Hate. Call a timeout against hate.